want to talk about if decisions in PHP. So I just want to talk about the logic of it, why they're used, and then we'll look at specifically how they're done in PHP. So if decisions in any language are for when you're trying to decide to do one thing or another. So instead of doing a sequence of commands or a bunch of code the same way every time, if decisions allow you to do one thing in one case and something else in another case. So there's sort of branches in your code to send things down one direction or another. For example, let's say you were looking for a specific username. So you can say if username equals one thing, do certain block of code, and if not, it would do something else, or maybe would do nothing at all. So that's why if decisions, the stuff I'm about to show you is necessary, because at some point in your code, you're going to have to send it along one route or another. I'll give you one more example, and then we'll look at an example and look at the syntax as well. But it's important to understand the logic. So another example might be age, right? You might have an age variable, and you might say, well, if age is less than a certain amount, do one thing, and if age is greater than that, might do something else. So that's what the if decision is going to allow you to do. It's going to allow you to do one thing in one case or do something else. Again, there's plenty of examples of needing to do this. So let's look at one, and then we'll look also at the syntax here, which is just as important, but it's something additionally that we need to look at and learn. Let's look at this example. Let's look at the logic of it first, right? We have a residence variable, and it has a value of FL in it. So what the if decision is going to allow us to do is say, okay, if residence equals a certain value, which it happens to equal here, we'll print something out, and otherwise it wouldn't print anything. So let's try this, and then we'll look specifically at the if syntax, which is a lot different, or a little different than anything else we've done. And I will go over all this syntax. But if this is FL, and if this happens, we should see something display. So let's see so notice it matched, so it printed something out. Let's look at how this works. So we have that resident state variable. So the if statement says if that equals to something, right? So when you write an if statement in PHP, it's going to be lowercase if, and then it's going to be followed by parentheses. And inside that parentheses will be a comparison. I'll talk about that in just a moment. But let's look at this syntax more carefully. If parentheses, kind of comparison. Notice the if statement does not end with a semicolon, so that's very important to remember. There's a few specific things in PHP that do not have a semicolon, and you do not want to put a semicolon in the end of the if. And the reason is kind of, if this is true, it's going to go down and continue and do whatever's below. So we have if parentheses, no semicolon, but notice we have curly brackets around all the stuff that we want to happen if this is true. So after the parentheses, we have an open curly bracket, a closed curly bracket, and then the stuff that you want to happen when that if is true will go inside those curly brackets, and notice it's indented over. So the syntax things there to remember are no semicolon here, and make sure you sort of not really tab, but maybe you put 3 or 4 spaces and indent every single thing that goes inside those curly brackets. So let's talk about this comparison, because I do want to talk about other comparison operators, although like I said, I'll show you another example as well. So what this is doing is always going to be comparing one thing to another. So in this case, we're comparing whatever this variable resident state has in it equal to this literal that's inside the quotes. So this could be something else. It could say if it's equal to something else. But for this case, since it's a no state tax, we'll say if it equal Florida, then it'll go in here and do whatever it finds inside the curly brackets. This double equals is also important to remember. Okay, if you're testing to see if one thing equals something else, right? If username equals Jeff, then the comparison operator here needs to be two equals in a row. So in PHP, one equals means you're assigning something, right? Two equals means you're comparing something. So here, when we have one equal, we're saying take this value and assign it to this variable. But when you're comparing in an if statement, if you're saying if something equals something, if you're testing to see if the two things are the same, make sure you do the double equals. So the other comparison operators in PHP, because there's, like we said, you might be testing for is age greater than something. So these are your comparison operators. If you're seeing if two things are equal, like a password or a username, you would do equal, greater than and less than are those signs. So if you want to say if age is less than something, you would use that. You could also use greater than or equal to, right? If we want to see if somebody was 18 or older, we could say are they greater than 17, or if you wanted to write your if statement, you could say is it greater than or equal to 18. And then the other comparison operator that you would use inside an if is the not equals. So if you want to eliminate all possibilities except for one, if you want to say if all states except for Florida, you could say exclamation point equal, and that means is one thing not equal to the other. So those are your comparison operators that you can use inside this if. Let's look at a different example real quick just to get a little better feel for the logic here. So let's say we're looking at an amount, and if they spent over a certain amount, we'll give them free shipping or something. So let's use an amount variable here, and let's say they spent $55 or something. So let's write an if statement to look for a specific amount. So it's going to be if, parentheses. I always go ahead and open and close my curly brackets so I don't forget to do that later. No semicolon here, and we need a comparison in here. So let's say if they spent more than $35. So what we want to compare is one thing to another, in this case the amount variable, to see if it's greater than or equal to 35. So that's an example of an if with the syntax and with the comparison in here, comparing one thing to another. So we're comparing the amount variable to see if it's greater than or equal to whatever this value is, in this case 35. So if amount is greater than 35, we could again, just for the sake of an example, maybe print out something that says they got free shipping. So let's test this with the current value. And notice it prints out free shipping. So let's walk through this logic just to understand it a bit more. Currently the amount is 55. This is going to compare that to 35. So if amount is greater than or equal to 35, yes it is. So it will go into the curly brackets and execute this line of code. So just to see if it for some reason didn't pass that test, if amount is not greater than 35, then we shouldn't see this message. So notice we have no other else case yet. We'll see about that in future videos, but this should make sense in terms of we did not see anything because it didn't pass this if test. So it just kept going down here and did whatever else, in this case nothing. We'll get more into it in future videos, but that's sort of the intro to how if logic works.